thank you for all of you to join us. This talk is so timely that we are most probably in the UK enter the second national lockdown from midnight to night. To invite Audrey remotely, virtually, to share with us her observation and experiences of how digital innovation can fight pandemics, and definitely also to strengthen if the situation of democratic society, which there are lots of debates about surveillance and also check and trace.
Thank you. Again, in the interest of time, I'll be speaking in very broad brushes and very cute dogs. And I will simply say that the fast, fair, and fun has been the three pillars when it comes to the counter COVID, but not just the pandemic, but also the infodemic. The twin demics can be overcome with the power of the demos, that is to say, the people, the social sector. The cute dog is very convincing. When we show people, wear a mask to prevent yourself from touching your own face. This is illustrated by the cute dog, the Shiba Inu, in a very funny way, so people share that. But more importantly, it speaks to one's private, personal interest in protecting one's own health. It says nothing about respecting the elderly or about doing your duty to the society or any of those communitarian values, which, while of course respectable, is not as viral as this kind of don't touch your own face. Again, the same thing applies to physical distancing. When you're indoor, keep 3 Shiba Inu away. When you're outdoor, keep 2 Shiba Inu away. Otherwise, wear a mask. Again, easy to remember, easy to spread. Idea was spreading, if spread in such a way, is what we call humor over rumor. And that forms our communication strategy throughout the collective intelligence. The collective intelligence, of course, is not only fun, but it's also very fast. Last December, when Dr. Li Wenliang, the PRC whistleblower, shared that there's 7 new SARS cases from the Wuhan Huanan seafood market, a young doctor in her 20s with the name No More Repipe posted on PTT, which is the Taiwan equivalent of Reddit, an analysis of this whistleblowing. PTT is run by random students from National Taiwan University. It doesn't have a shareholder board. It doesn't answer to advertisers, which means that it's open source. And people generally conducted very civil discussions on it, which is why it acts as kind of a collective intelligence system to fact check this. So our medical officers immediately noticed that, send an email to WHO, and then started health inspections from Wuhan to Taiwan the very next day, the first day of January. And so the government, if we trust the citizens, as evidenced by the Civicus Monitor, Taiwan is the only country in all of Asia that has a completely open freedom of speech, of the press, and things like that, then the citizens also trust each other more because they can engage in the behavior that are more pro-social, on pro-social media, but acting out of rational self-interest. Case in point, there's a hotline, 1922, that anybody can call and ask any questions and get them answered. And the scientific basis and things like that were explained very patiently by this huge call center. And if the call center cannot handle a complaint, it's escalated within a couple minutes to the CECC. For example, around mid-April, we had this call from a young boy, I think still in primary school. And he said, "You're rationing mask. I don't want to wear your pink medical mask, but all I get is pink medical mask. People will laugh at me at school. I don't want to go to school anymore, or I don't want to wear a mask." And so the CECC, everyone in the next day's press conference wore pink medical mask, regardless of their gender. And in the team of the participation officer, which we have such a team in each and every ministry, we work with such trending hashtags, such trending sentiments. So pink medical mask become a trending thing to do in social media. And by the way, the cute dog is a companion of the Ministry of Health and Welfare's participation officer. So all they need to do after each press conference is to go home and take fresh photos of the dog. And then we have more communication material. And so this fast iterative response cycle showed the government's trust to the citizens to come up with new ideas and thereby amplifying the collective intelligence. The other thing I want to highlight is a unique community in Taiwan with the name Gov0 or G0V. You see, each and every government website in Taiwan ends in something .gov.tw. But if the citizen think that it's not working as well as it should, it can always fork a system, meaning that making a system that works the same but better by changing an O to a 0. So just by changing O to a 0 in your browser, you get into the shadow government that works in a more fair and fun way. Case in point, in early February, when everybody understood from the daily CCC press conference that wearing a mask is essential, and if 3/4 of people wear a mask and wash their hands, the virus will not spread, the R value will be under 1. Of course, people start to buy masks, stockpile masks, and we run out of masks very quickly because at the time we have 23 million people, but only make less than 2 million medical masks a day. And so a very interesting innovation happened. Someone from Taiwan with the name Howard Wu invented this mask availability map that enabled people to report which pharmacies still have masks and which pharmacies have run out of masks. And so I saw the tool, and then I talked to the head of the cabinet, our premier, saying we need to trust citizens with open data. And not only open data, but real-time open data, updated every 30 seconds, which is open API, which then enabled people who make voice assistants, chatbots, and so on. That all in all enabled me, for example, when I queue in line for the rationed mask, if I'm an adult, nowadays I'm entitled 9 medical masks per 2 weeks, and then this number will go to 49 within just a couple minutes. So people queuing after me can refresh their phone and keep the system accountable. If they see this number not depleting but rather increase, they will call 1922 right there. And if I'm a child, of course, the number will go down by 10. And so this enabled not only this kind of navigation tools, but also analysis tools. There's a very famous civic technology project called OpenStreetMap. In Taiwan, the OpenStreetMap community worked with this civic tech company called Ping'an, and then they analyzed this map so that if you zoom out, even if it looks like it's a fair distribution in February, if you look at only the distance on the map, it's actually not very fair if you calculate by public transportation the time that one need to take to travel to the pharmacies to take the mask. So with OpenStreetMap technology, there's a parliamentarian, or the name is Gao Hong'an, and Gao, she was the VP of data analytics at Foxconn. So she knows something about data. And so using this data analysis, she, in her parliamentary interpellation, asked Minister Chen Shizhong, our commander of the CECC, saying, you know, what do you say about this unfair distribution? And instead of defending the policy, Minister simply said, oh, legislator, teach us. And then we start co-creating with her and the OpenStreetMap team the very next day. And the very next day, we introduced the convenience store pre-ordering and 24-hour pickup rule, and then made the distribution much more fair also with the participating pharmacist. And so the lesson is very simple. It's a Pygmalion effect. If you trust the citizens, citizens become trustworthy. If you don't trust the citizens and impose new measures, such as take down, lock down, shut down, anything that's top down, then the citizens become afraid of the government and you don't get high quality data. And so the rule of thumb during the Taiwan model playbook is we do not collect any new data that we were not already collecting and processing before the pandemic. We do not use the pandemic or the infodemic as an excuse to collect more data from the citizenry. So we can talk about this more in the Q&A part, but I promised a short brief. So this is my short brief. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Audrey. I think that is a punchy brief. Then I would say, because I think the situation here is quite worrying, actually. So I would first of all invite our Professor Stephen Timos from our team to start the discussion with Audrey. And certainly, I'm sure that there are many questions from our audience. Not actually, I think it's beyond the UK border, in Europe, in Austria, and also in in Germany, that our participants might have different queries to discuss with Audrey. So Stephen, please kick up our discussion board, and then certainly we open the floor for discussion.
Okay, thank you, Chun-Yi, and thank you, Audrey. That was fascinating and stimulating. Yes, and it's a topic where it's easy to make it dull, and your emphasis on fun, I think, is really charming and refreshing. So that's great to hear. I'm kind of conscious that I really don't want to monopolize too much of the time, but I am going to kind of be a bit selfish and take advantage of being given a small platform to really say, just to ask about one thing, and you did say you were going to go over things quickly. Can you tell us a bit more about the thing of changing the letter O to 0? And I think you used the word balk, which I don't understand. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. A fork is a kitchen utensil, and it represents like a fork in the road, right?
Okay.
And so it's a term from the free software movement, where a fork means you take a project that you like, but you don't like where it's going. And so you take whatever there is in the project, and then you lead it in a different direction. And that's called creating a fork. If a fork is not meant to be merged, it's a hard fork. If a fork is meant to be more merged, it's a soft fork. And in GovZero, there's many soft forks that are meant to be merged, adopted by the government.
Okay, that's great. And so you were saying, how has this approach, which obviously comes from free software, are you saying that's being used kind of in the development of government policy and government action? Is that, do you want to just flesh that out a little bit more? Because I think it's fascinating.
Certainly. So GovZero, which started late 2012 and I joined around 2013, systematically look at each and every part of government digital service and find a way to make it fun and interactive and understandable. The inaugural project, famously, is the National Budget Visualization. Afterward, we moved on to, for example, make a truly transcultural dictionary that absorbed all the Ministry of Education dictionaries, including Taiwanese Holok, Taiwanese Hakka, Mandarin, Amis, which is an indigenous language, English, German, French, you name it, and even Tibetan, I think. But anyway, the point is that anyone who care about language and lexicography can join the lexicographic WEC, much like Urban Dictionary, but for all the Taiwanese languages and beyond. And then the leading fact-checking enabler, the CoFact project, is another flagship GovZero project where people on end-to-end encrypted channels called Line, which is like WhatsApp, which is where the misinformation brew to become disinformation, right? A virality and a toxicity grows in closed groups before it makes its way to public social media. So on the embryonic stage of the infodemic virus, people can already forward any piece of message to the CoFact bot, which then sends it to a crowdsourced fact-checking group so that the bot can get back to you saying that this has been clarified or is actually a scientific fact. And so this then, in turn, enable timely responses in form of humorous messages and so on for the trending rumors, to make trending humors, to counter trending rumors, even before they make to the public social media. There's many other examples, like the Taiwan project that crowdsourced legislation and how we broke the kind of standoff between the taxi driver on one side and Uber on the other, so that we co-created our ride-sharing legislation. That's also a GovZero project called Taiwan. There's many, and so if you're interested, search for G0V, and you'll find many articles.
Okay, that's great. I just want to ask one more thing, and this is something completely different, but you talked about democracy, and I know a little about the history of Taiwan, and that democracy is relatively recent in Taiwan, that for a long time there was a very undemocratic regime in your nation. And I'm struck, of course, democracy is something that has evolved very, very slowly in Britain over, you could say 1,000 years if you were minded to. And I was just wondering if is that history important? I was wondering, maybe democracy seems more, because the struggle is maybe recent and in living memory, that do you think democracy is somehow more precious as a value to people in Taiwan? And that explains all of the things you've talked about are predicated on a very high degree of participation. And do you think that's part of it?
Yeah, in our recent presidential election, I think the voting turnout is almost 3/4. It's 74.9%, which is a very high turnout rate. And so evidently people care about democracy, but they care not only about voting, which in internet parlance is like uploading 3 bits of information every 2 years, right? It's a very low bandwidth, like super low bandwidth. And so people also participated in participatory budgeting, in referenda, both local and national, in sandbox applications, presidential hackathons, you name it. And the reason why is, I think, there's twofold reasons. One is that for us, the first presidential election in '96 is the same year that the World Wide Web got popular. And so for us, it's the same sort of people working on democracy and working on the World Wide Web. And so from very early on, democracy and the internet grew together, intertwined in Taiwan. So we see democracy as a technology. Just like anybody can fork a World Wide Web website, anyone can also view source of the democracy and even send pull requests, that is to say, patches, proposals to fix even the most obscure kernel code, which is called the Constitution. Taiwan went through 6 constitutional amendments since then, and we're working on another one right now. And so because it's so new, it's very malleable. We see democracy as a technology. The other thing is that it's also part of Taiwanese identity. We remember the martial law. I remember 2003, the SARS pandemic, well, not pandemic, epidemic, where we had to lock down the Heping Hospital unannounced, a massive violation of human rights. People don't want to go back to lockdown. So because the memory is so fresh, it reminds us that we really need to fight a pandemic with no lockdown, because we know how bad it is, and also fight an infodemic with no takedown, because we know how bad it is.
Thank you very much. That's fascinating, and I could, as I say, I could monopolise the conversation and talk to you all morning. But it's important, in a spirit of democracy, to let other people ask some questions. Chun-Yi, how are we going to manage this?
Certainly, I think we already have the one of the questions from Andreas on the chat panel. Andreas asked that isn't there a danger that citizens being infantilized when the most information is turned into the quote displays? So if Audrey, you would like to answer, and I'm also queuing for the question, so I would respect to our audience first, but because Andreas actually posed the question first. So Audrey.
Sure. Yeah, infantilization, like treating citizens not as adults but children, it's not like that. We become like infants. The ministers become cute anime. Doraemon, I don't know whether you know Doraemon, is the prototypical assistive intelligence. It's an AI that works in a way that's always assistive and never authoritarian. Well, this is me as Doraemon.
喵凤是一只人形宠物猫，它是泰雄即将毕业的大学生喵凤的主人。对于未来感到微微的焦虑，泰雄只要一焦虑，就会想要吸猫啊。是，不但有机会取得国际证照，通过考核还有学习奖励金哦。
任务达成，其实我是来自未来的机器猫，是专程回来帮你成为第一大使。拜拜。哦，泰雄要认真工作哦。
好的啦。
All right, that's our government communication, like official government communication. And so I don't think it's infantilizing young people. it may be infantilizing me, so, but it does promote discussion. And because I always relinquish the copyright into the Creative Commons, people remix and make their own cute anime mimetic remixes, and that's entirely fine. That's what the freedom of information and the freedom of press is all about. This is about unleashing people's innovation and creativity. So I think infantilization only is a problem if the journalist's words and the citizen's word is somehow lower than the minister's word. Somehow the minister can force down unwelcome speech, then that, of course, may be a problem. But in Taiwan's case, the social sector has a higher legitimacy than the cabinet. And so what we are doing is essentially just contributing to the commons so that people can share the joy and the fun of learning science together.
I have to mute myself, Audrey, to see your video. It is creative and also very inviting, I would say. Very cute. Yes, that's right. Fully hats off. My question, if our audience don't mind me abuse my power as a chair to Audrey, is here in the UK, also in European countries, emphasize a lot of the GDPR. And I do fully get of your punchy presentation about the openness of the digital platform and free request of information from the participants. However, there's also sort of the strong resistance from the society here to relinquish of the information, and that somehow definitely create an obstacle in a current situation of pandemic, especially if the government really wants to roll out the test and track as the first step to control or trying to control the pandemic. I'm not sure whether there will be a solution. As I know that Taiwan's case is different, but it's just to in line with what is going on here. Would you mind to have some comments on this point? Thank you.
Yes. I'm also a strong proponent of GDPR, and we are seeking GDPR adequacy. Our work to establish an independent protection authority is slated to be discussed in the parliament if the parliament actually functions. But anyway, it's malfunctioning at the moment over another issue altogether. But once it resumes session, we will work on the independent DPA. That's the last stop toward GDPR adequacy. So I'm totally fine with GDPR, and which is actually why I stress that our digital quarantine do not collect any new data that we're not already collecting before the pandemic, because the privacy budget and the cybersecurity concerns are very well understood for existing infrastructure. Now, if you introduce a Bluetooth dongle, a app that reads your GPS signals, Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, 5G, then people are, of course, wary about the cybersecurity and privacy concern because they've never seen this. Even if it's open source, it takes time to audit. But in Taiwan's case, because we never did any app, and our digital quarantine works with even a Nokia flip phone, and because it's based on cell phone angulation, the cell phone towers are already collecting where roughly your phone is anyway, up to like 50-meter radius in the most urban areas. So it doesn't know which room you are in. It doesn't even know which block you are in, but it does know which kind of precinct you are in. And so using this like very rough data, we managed to build the digital quarantine system where you have a choice when returning to Taiwan. Either go to the hotel to stay there physically isolated for 14 days, or you can remain at your own flat if you have your own bathroom and doesn't live with vulnerable people, but put your phone, or if you don't have a phone, we give you one for 2 weeks, into the digital fence. And then the phone, of course, is automatically tracked by the telecoms, but they are already doing so. It's not sent to any commercial processor or anything. And all they do, if you turn off the phone or the phone goes outside of the perimeter, is to send just like we would for earthquake warnings or, I don't know, floods, typhoon evacuation warnings, forest fire, and things like that. And it's sent to a local medical officer who would then check your whereabouts. So at the core, it's the simple idea that this SMS has no way to read your email. It has no way to interact with your WhatsApp. It has no way to hijack your phone in any way because it's just an SMS automated sensor. And so based on this, then we pay people a stipend of around 30 euros a day if you work with us for 2 weeks to quarantine. But if you break the quarantine, you pay us back up to 1,000 times that. So people don't break the quarantine. And that's how we make sure that we reuse existing collected data, but we do not actually aggregate it more, nor do we send it to commercial processes.
Sure. I think that's really important. And in a sense that also one of our participants, Jens, and he's also the European Association of Taiwan Studies board member, addressed from Berlin that saying that Taiwan actually has a national health databases, as Audrey, you mentioned. And I think we have the national health card of that card with all the databases that the government, the health, yes, that's the one. Yes, that's national health card. That very important card actually contains all of our health history. Yeah, and Jens says that actually in Germany, not have such a base data. So that's quite different concerned, a different situation of German government and the Taiwan government in terms of the privacy concerns. And also one of our guests, Zoe, says that how do you encourage the citizens to send information as a fact to check, but also whether the citizen, are you trusting the citizen to send the true information or misinformation? So, and the second question from Zoe is how to win the citizens' trust. I think Audrey mentioned of how to win the citizens' trust by the presentation in a sense of openness and the not to cross the boundary of the citizens' privacy to the health records and data. But Zoe also asked that why would the citizens send the data to lie before they circulate it, and people can get into cliques of disinformation, become believers in certain conspiracy theory. So it's about more of whether the information citizens send is true, one, and also whether the citizen would believe the government's information is true, second question. So that's Zoe's question. Should we get to that and then come to Mark's question and also the host question?
Okay, certainly, and very good questions. So first of all, let me clarify. Cofax.g0v.tw is not a government project. All the international fact-checking work members were not paid by the government. Actually, according to their rules, it's forbidden for the government or government ministers or the parties to pay them. It's entirely crowd-supported. And because of that, the International Fact-Checking Network serves as the main place where the fact-checking happens. Of course, everybody can volunteer. There's middle schoolers, even primary schoolers, volunteer to work with the IFCN members in Taiwan to fact-check each and every word that every presidential candidate said during their platform and debate last December and January. And so it is just about, your question is like, why do we flag email as spam? Well, we do it out of a sense of civic duty, I guess. The social sector's legitimacy is the main reason behind why people is willing to share the information that they receive as potentially disinformation for the fact-checking. And it's also very useful. And the clarification also a lot of fun. When the clarification becomes a lot of fun, then people expect to share the disinformation and receive a fun picture. For example, people may share, hey, I see this disinformation that says, perm in your hair many times a week will be subject to $1 million fine. Is it true or not? And they kind of expect to see within the same news cycle, a couple hours, this post from our head of cabinet, our premier, Su Zhenchang, who said, and this is his young version of his photo, I may be bald now, but I will not punish people with hair. And what we have done is a labeling requirement for hair products starting 2021. And then a hair dryer and the premier as he looks now, saying, if you perm your hair many times a week, it will not damage your bank account, but it will damage your hair. Look at me for what will happen to your hair. And so it's just hilarious. And so because of that, people joined us by a spirit of not just social solidarity, but just sheer fun. Look at 9gag for the kind of psychological motivation to participate in this kind of civic source checking.
I think the main point, Audrey, is actually the cabinet members make fun of yourselves. And
that's right. It's called
that
humor.
is really encouraging. I think equal fun can be made about Boris Johnson's hair, that he never really have a hairdo. It's always like Messi just like get up in the morning, see his hair. Wow, it's again so that indicates he's so busy. So, but anyway, I really respect Su Zhenchang. He's very. I didn't think he's so personal. Let's say. Okay. We have more questions. I think Mark's question also related to the citizens' trust. He's in quite infected area, Liverpool, a bit more serious than our city. Not. Mark mentioned, because for Audrey's background information, I think we mentioned to you earlier about the central and local governments, and especially in the city of Liverpool and Greater Manchester area, there's quite discontent among the citizens, and also the local government was quite vocal against the lockdown. Mark's question is, again, how to gain the citizens' trust, especially in the sense that in this country, in the UK, there's a gap among the north and south. I think the situation in Taiwan might not be the same, but of course, welcome for your observation, suggestion of the different inequality, let's say inequality caused by the pandemic, and then caused, of course, to the citizens' distrust of the areas being mostly impacted.
Yeah, we are with you. We know what you're going through, because in 2003, that's exactly what happened. The Taipei municipal government was saying completely different, actually opposite things to the national government in 2003. And at the time, there's no IC card for the national health insurance in the mainland Taiwan. We only have that in Pescador Islands in Penghu. So people in Penghu benefited from the IC card, which is why the IC card got so popular, because people can see from peer-reviewed journal articles that it really played a very large part in containing the SARS 1.0 in the Pescador Islands, but not the Taiwan main island. And so the point is that we know how hard it is. And that is why the Constitutional Court ruled right after SARS that this unannounced lockdown or whatever top-down measure is barely constitutional. It shouldn't be constitutional if not for the fact that we did not have preparation. So the next time around, if we still do the same, then it will be considered unconstitutional, so says the Constitutional Court. And so they charged the legislature to make a new set of rules that would have not only a central epidemic command center and a 122 hotline, but also crucially to make sure that all the privacy invasions, all the limitations to a freedom of movement and so on are transparent. It's pre-announced. People returning to Taiwan know what they are going through in the next 14 days, but after which there's no stigma, they are free. And so the very limited time, limited privacy invasion and legislation that says the national health insurance card must never be used for anything that's not a public service. So no commercial advertisement usage or anything like that. And these founded the kind of foundational legal cornerstone of our counter-COVID responses. So my main suggestion is after COVID, SARS 2.0, prepare your legislation for the SARS 3.0. For SARS 3.0 will happen. It's just whether the next year or next decade. And so do what we did right after SARS and remember that. And the second thing is that even if the top scientists and the top political leaders, they may kind of disagree from time to time, which isn't a problem in Taiwan because our author of our epidemiology textbook literally is, when he wants to talk to the vice president, he just look into the mirror because he is the vice president. And so we don't have that problem. But in other jurisdictions, making sure that the top political leader and the top science leader appear in a way that even if there are disagreements, even if there are errors, if there are problems about, say, the asymptomatic transmission that people maybe got wrong at some time or whatever, and they can collectively say, we were wrong, we're sorry, but we are competent, and then we will fix it in such and such a way, like next Thursday. And so like owning up to whatever mistakes they make, appear from both the scientific and the political side in public communication, and promise a very short turnaround time to fix any problem. That's the key to rebuild the trust.
That's why, Audrey, we need to record this talk, because we do need to let your very good suggestion to be heard by the governments, because they do have quite of disagreements of the science and the politicians, quite a lot, I would have to say. We have more questions to you, Audrey. Li Ho, one of our audience, says, asks about how do we, in the beginning of the pandemic, how does the Taiwanese government spot out the rumors relating to COVID in Wuhan on Taiwan's version of Red Death in the first place? So what was the procedure does the Taiwanese government go through before the confirming the problem? So it's about how to overcome the bureaucratic red tape.
Yes, that's a great question. The medical officers, of course, themselves use the PTT. So like just over the course of the midnight, they just noticed the post and also upvoted it and did the checking. And after enabling the health inspections, which is the standard operation procedure because of the SARS experience, it rings an alarm bell for everyone because Dr. Li went from SARS. So no red tape when anyone from Taiwan looks at the uppercase letters SARS. Anyone above 30 years old rings an alarm bell immediately. So there could be no red tape. We immediately start health inspections. But we did follow the procedures. We sent an email to WHO. We sent a couple experts to Wuhan the next week, I think on the 12th of January. And then they brought back more indications that it's probably human-to-human transmission. And then the CECC was established a week afterward on the 20th of January. And so the short answer is that because the CECC is a combination of science and political leadership, and is enacted by the law already. So once the CECC establishes, the scientist basically takes command. And that is, I think, why we can roll out, for example, the mask rationing and other rules so quickly, because everybody understood the science that when 3/4 of people wear the mask and wash their hands, the virus will not spread. And initially I was like, so do we distribute it in a more efficient fashion, like 50 masks in the box at a time through lottery or through rotation? Wouldn't it get people's mask stockpile problem solved even more quickly? Or maybe we use mobile payment and so on. But actually the deputy premier at the time, Chen Qimai, now the Kaohsiung mayor, who was actually a student of the then Vice President Chen Jianren in public health, called me to his office and started to draw on a piece of paper this matrix of the basic transmission rate, the mask availability map, and the model that makes me understand the whole thing about the transmission rate and why the community spread need to be avoided early on. And so my point is that because the scientists are running the show as political leadership, and the scientists like me, I may be a computer scientist, but I know nothing about epidemiology. And my fellow cabinet members would just teach me the SIR model and SEIR model and things like that, like on a napkin, right? And then I become, an amateur epidemiologist. And I'm not alone in this. The VP Chen Jianren recorded on the most popular massive online open course platform, Hahao, a free course. It's even in English and Mandarin too, for everybody to attend for free to learn about basic epidemiology. And so because he holds both political and scientific leadership, people just attend his classes, and the cute dog just spread a message in very short films, like the cute cat video you just saw, like literally every day, every 2 p.m. So everybody become kind of amateur epidemiologists. And that is the true secret of the Taiwan early response, because there's no red tape if everybody understands the basic science.
Thank you, Audrey. There's a longer question, if I may, to shorten a little bit of Cinta's very good question about the consensus building. The basic, if I correctly summarize Cinta's question, you could post your hand up if I don't do you justice, which is to ask whether there would be apps, or there's a bigger, larger, rough consensus among groups larger than 100 people of the apps that you mentioned. But are there any already apps or software that would be used for smaller groups to facilitate consensus building within their groups, and also with the work colleagues and hopefully smaller community that could help people to coexist more harmoniously? Would be possible that this kind of help would be able to create more trust between people and in a smaller group, not such a large, bigger group?
Well, Polis is open source, so it can be tuned to work on small groups as well. And so I would encourage you to visit pol.is, and we are sponsoring the cybersecurity audit and related development, including localization, multilingualization of the Polis software. So Polis is malleable. It doesn't need to be tens of thousands of people. That's the first thing. And for smaller groups, there's also Lumio, which works pretty well for smaller groups. But if people already met face-to-face, I think the technology is secondary, is assistive. I've seen really good groups run out of the least good groupware, up and including Line, which is not intended to be a productivity software. But you can run a good consensus mechanism using Line if you have a good facilitating mechanism. So the professional facilitator, non-violent communication, open space technology, dynamic facilitation, these are the important skills. And once you know those skills, it can transfer across different mediums, even on the least facilitative platforms such as Line or WhatsApp or Facebook.
Thank you, Audrey. And Gerardus, apologize for me not to explain your name correctly, asking you whether do you work with private sector organization or keep everything in-house, aside from grassroots citizen action discussed. If there's no private sector involvement, do you think that helps to build legitimacy for majors? Or even, could you offer even better solutions, please?
Yeah, we do work with the economic sector, but the economic sector still conform to the norm that's already set by the social sector. So the idea, very simply put, is that the social sector collects, curates, and processes the data. And it's the same even before the pandemic. The mask availability map takes a lot of cues from a quite famous citizen science project in Taiwan called the Airbox. And in GovZero, there's the G0V air map that shows the real-time, I think this is PM 2.5 levels all around Taiwan. And each and every of those dots are set up by some primary school teacher or just people volunteering their balcony using very inexpensive equipment, less than 100 euros per device. Because we have broadband as a human right, anywhere in Taiwan, they're guaranteed to have 10 megabits per second both ways. And at very affordable, just 16 euros a month. If they don't, it's my fault, personally. And so any person can set up such a measuring device, and then they can work with the private sector, not only the makers of such boxes, but data analysis service providers, weather prediction service providers. And they can also work with the public sector, namely the environment minister, and say, hey, look at these gaps. And these are the industrial parks. These are the areas that we as primary school teachers probably cannot break and enter and install our air boxes. But it turns out that the public sector owned the lamp in the industrial parks. So we work with those manufacturers and system integrators that makes those lamps and say, why don't you just put some PM 2.5 sensing equipment to it? And the end goal is to make sure that everybody become a participatory citizen. In GDPR parlance, it's called joint data controllership in this kind of data collaborative. So we foster each and every case like this into data collaboratives, which of course including the industry analytics models, algorithm, and so on, the so-called private sector, I call it the economic sector, but it always adds its value based on the social norm firmly set by the social sector first.
Thank you, Audrey. I think we have Caroline to ask a very punchy question. Again, that Taiwan is famous for high scale of freedom. It's a democratic country. But Caroline's question is why? When Taiwanese government puts its own citizens into a 14 days quarantine, no one complains about it and sees as an invading of human rights, because here is much of talk of the human rights and stuff. So how does the Taiwanese government make people believe that quarantine is not capitalized, depriving the value of democracy? Please.
Well, the thing is that it applies equally to everyone, right? So there's no privilege, and people all have to go through the quarantine. And the point here is that people understood that there is no financial or social price to pay if you turn out to get COVID. It's actually more, it's cheaper to visit the clinic if you show the symptoms. You put on a mask and go to the clinic because of the single payer national health insurance. And so in this sense, when people complain about it, they complain about, for example, that they did not know why the SMS system works this way. When they turn off their phone, why do people knock at their door? That didn't used to happen for earthquake and flood warnings. So something else must be going on. It's not just about geofencing. It's also detecting whether the cell phone is on or off, which is true, right? It's a extra thing to do. It's not entirely the same as the earthquake and flood warnings. And so because we never declare a state of emergency, so they work with parliamentarians who did a formal hearing and interpellation to the Department of Cybersecurity, which built the system. So they came in with all the UMLs and the data structures and so on, and did a live stream public hearing with the parliamentarians. So the approval rate was 91% before that interpellation. And we thank the 9% for keeping us honest and accountable. After the explanation, the approval rate is 94%. But we still thank the other 6% for keeping us honest and accountable, because we're not working in an emergency state where we get to do everything before the parliamentary oversight, right? Now we have to do everything since the beginning of the pandemic after parliamentary oversight and interpellation. And so that's democracy. The citizens' representatives asking very fine detailed questions of how exactly this digital fence system works, and that upholds and deepens the value of democracy.
Thank you, Audrey. I think we have an unavoidable elephant in the room, which is the already happened, the election. And then therefore our audience asked the question about, it's a bit a perplexing question, that a poll about people around the world support Trump or Biden. And a lot of people in Taiwan support Trump. We understand that actually this is not exactly what we invited you today for, but since the election is here, so I would say that probably could offer your observation from Taiwan, definitely. Whether Zoe's question, whether it's contradict to the democratic ideas in Taiwan, that a lot of people support Trump, is that because of geopolitics in the region?
Well, the Trump administration, from Taiwanese people's point of view, did put clarity to the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. That is not to be denied. It really is true. And also the Trump administration defined Taiwan as not only a kind of military, geopolitical, whatever, partner, like a NATO thing, right? But it also defined Taiwan as a force for good, a value partner, and acknowledged Taiwan's role, maybe taking the mantle from Hong Kong as the free press place, as a place where Oslo Freedom Forum can take place, as a place where the National Democracy Institute and the IRI, the Republican equivalent, can set up their headquarters, where the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, right, the Liberal Democrats Foundation from Germany, can set up their regional headquarters, which they just did, where the reporters Sans Frontières, the Reporter Without Borders, can set up their regional headquarters. And the Trump administration facilitated a lot of this work. And so I think the Taiwanese people, really, I don't think it is a cult of personality thing. I think they recognize that there's strategic clarity. And no matter which party Taiwanese people belong to, all of them believe in deepening democracy and connecting to the international community so that we can spread the voice of democracy. And that's what, from the foreign affairs point of view, the Trump administration really amplified Taiwan's voice in that regard as well. And so I think that has a rational explanation. It doesn't have to be a code of personality explanation.
Thank you, Audrey. I think also on this note that let me take 1 minute to advertise that our next event, which is definitely on the point of the elections of the USA and the about to come Brexit, and also Taiwan's past election 2020 actually in December. So for our current audience that you would like to have more of the view, we have the panel presentation in December 11th and 12th. Have you voted that in those elections from different countries, areas? But definitely, let me just take the final check that whether we have further questions for Audrey, because we have her time is limited, but she's very generous with us. We have the final 5 minutes. So if any of us have a question, just raise your hand. Susan said that learned a lot from the media, that you provide consultancy or share your experience with Japanese and South Korea governments. What are the challenges you experienced and have foreseen?
Yeah, a few days before the World Health Assembly, Taiwan did our own kind of pre-meeting with 14 countries and economies. And it is a kind of weird, intimate experience because we get to see very senior level officials' homes and their kids and their dogs. Anyway, so the point is that the pandemic may distance us from our friends and family, but it actually brought the international community much closer on a shared sense of urgency. And I think it's a good thing. It's definitely a good thing. And it empowers us to tackle other global scale issues, such as the disinformation crisis, such as the climate crisis. And so I foresee that this will be the norm going forward, that we will have a hybrid, multilateral, multi-stakeholder, digital-enabled, no difference between the member seat and observer seat, which doesn't make sense on a video meeting anyway. And Taiwan will have a full role to play in these regions. And we also see that the Japanese and South Korean governments learned really quickly about this idea of civic technology and trusting the leading civic technologists. Case in point, the person that was the name Haruseki-san, the leader of Code for Japan, that built the COVID dashboard, which gets adopted also by reverse procurement to the Tokyo metropolitan area and work very closely with GovZero, essentially the Japanese equivalent of GovZero, just gets promoted or recruited 3 days ago as the associate CIO, as the deputy CIO of the cabinet office of the Japan government. And so they understood the importance of digitalization. They now understand digital is about connecting people to people, and IT is about connecting machine to machine. They are planning to set up a digital agency, and they also have a reform minister. And the South Korean civic technologists and the leader I also met through video conferencing. One of them is just 14 years old, the same age when I started my first startup and quit middle school. And so those young people brought the mask availability map to Korea just in a few short weeks. We started early February. They started in March. And so I think this made in the world, this track zero diplomacy, where source and free software, it really works. And I foresee not really challenges in this way of working, but future challenges like disinformation and climate change that we have to tackle also through this model.
Thank you, Audrey. You mentioned really good point of the pandemic actually make world closer, which unfortunately in my very miserable side, only see pandemic make world fragment. But the last promise you last question. Zoe asked a question. How do you think that we can persuade particular leaders in other democratic countries, for example, in the EU, to adopt digital democracy? Suggestion from you, Audrey, please.
Sure. Start small. It's much easier to start from a university campus. It's much easier to start from a district. The earliest participatory budgeting in Taiwan started just in one very small district in I think, New Taipei City, and sponsored only by one city councilor. And when your scale is small, as the previous question mentioned, less than 100 people, you can't fail because these people already know each other. It's just something that enhances, augments, assists their existing decision-making procedures. And so start small and connect people and make cute dog or cat pictures and videos. And sooner than later, this idea will spread. It will go viral.
Thank you, Audrey. Our Minister of Digital Minister from Taiwan. You provide us very insightful and also approachable, and importantly, make everyone feel like it is possible to participate from Taiwan's experience. Thank you so very much, Audrey, for your time today with us. And thanks for all of our audience for your questions and listening to us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Audrey. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Live long and prosper.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.